Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French.
There's no water in the stores, and the stores are closed, so it's difficult to find water.
Now, the power might be on for all but about 100,000 Texans, but they're nowhere near out of the woods. The problem, as you heard, water. As we speak, more than 10 million people have to boil their water before using it because it got tainted. Many people, they've got no running water whatsoever. Pipes have burst, pipes froze, and the lack of electricity shut down supplies in big chunks of the state as it couldn't be pumped, let alone treated. It's not just the drinking water. Fire hydrants, they're frozen in many areas, including San Antonio, where firefighters had a tough time dousing an apartment fire because the closest hydrants, they were frozen and they had to bring in water from down the street.
Our main concern is water supply. All these hydrants out here are dry. Well, they're not dry, they're just frozen and there's no water. That's our problem, is once we make a little bit of advance on the fire, we run out of water.
And of course, a huge issue with how many people setting fires in their own homes to try and have any heat. Now, in many parts of the state, including Houston, Galveston, some people lining up for hours to get bottled water. Residents, they are fed up.
On the road since 6, and I know it's at 11:30, but I'm gonna sit here. I have no choice. All the stores in my area are out of water. I've been living in the truck to try to keep warm. This has become my house now. So we can't get gas, we can't get food.
I have some really crappy IKEA chairs that we burned first, and then some bookshelf inserts. We eventually moved all the blankets onto the wall, closed everything down that we could.
But here is, with all that pain and frustration that you can feel, this is what's so maddening. This could have all been prevented in Texas, but it also could have actually been even worse, a lot worse. Power authorities say the entire grid was just minutes or even seconds away from catastrophic failure that could have plunged Texas into darkness for months. Only rolling blackouts prevented that from happening. And now the blame game, it is in full force. Even though every source of power, including gas, electric, nuclear, totally failed, Governor Abbott would lead you to believe that this is all about renewable energies, wind and also solar, even though in reality it accounts for just a small portion of the actual supply.
This shows how the Green New Deal would be a deadly deal for the United States of America. Our wind and our solar got shut down, and they were collectively more than 10% of our power grid. As a result, it just shows that fossil fuel is necessary.
The cowardly political BS wasn't just limited to the governor. Two Republican congressmen from Texas are also pointing fingers. Ronnie Jackson, he says, quote, "This is what the Biden-Harris plan for our energy sector looks like. Corrupt green policies that leave us in the dark and Texas energy workers out of a job." Dan Crenshaw from Houston tweeted, "Alexa, show me what happens when you let Democrats control energy policy." I should note that all of this could have been avoided if the Republicans, and I'm not just singling out one or two, but the party in power in Texas for the better part of a decade, all of GOP, if they took better job here running the state with actual precautions. Now, more than 10 years ago, bitterly cold weather knocked out power to 4 million Texans. After that, federal regulators said this doesn't have to happen again. They told the state they have to winterize plants and equipment to prevent the same thing from happening again. Here's ending a suspense. They didn't do it. The same thing happened again this week after state officials did not heed the warnings. And to make it even worse, Texas is the only state in America that has its own power grid, so it can't call on the cavalry to draw power from other places during an emergency. Instead, the Lone Star State opted to really do it on their own. And that is just the starkest recent example of Texas giving the middle finger to Washington. Now, after I get to my first guest, we'll discuss some of the many others. Plus, where the state government is failing, many Texans are picking up the slack. The owner of a furniture store in Houston, think about this. We've got to go to private citizens here. The guy known as Mattress Mac, he's opened up his stores and turned them into warming centers for people stuck in the cold. He did the same thing, I should note, after floods and hurricanes in Texas. And as Ted Cruz continues to do damage control and spin after flying off to Cancun to avoid the Texas cold, two Democrats are also stepping out to help out. That includes Beto O'Rourke. Remember him? a frequent guest of the program, the former congressman who unsuccessfully tried to take Cruz's job in the 2018 Senate race. Well, Beto has organized a huge effort, really massive here, contacting senior citizens to make sure they have what they need to get through this to stay warm. His group has spoken with, get this, 800,000 seniors and counting. And AOC, she started an internet campaign to raise money for Texans in need. So far, $2 million has been raised to this point. I want to bring in my guest to discuss the state of where we are and how we got here. Gene Wu, a Democratic state representative, and he's from the southern portion of Houston. Representative, I know that, for example, even yesterday, you're trying to bring hot meals to people that were abandoned. And in many ways, I got to imagine your constituents feel abandoned by their state right now. I know there's a lot of finger pointing going on, but the fact that we're even in this circumstance, they have every reason to be outraged.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm outraged. I'm outraged about all the man-made things that led up to this disaster. I'm outraged about how we responded to it. I'm outraged about what we're doing right now. But, the main thing to do at this point is get people through this crisis. Let's do the finger pointing. Let's do the blame sharing. After this, after everyone gets fed, after everyone has their power restored and has water, there's plenty of time for that. And believe you me, by God, we're gonna get to the bottom of this.
Now, give an idea about how many days we might be talking about, because with all the bursted pipes, there's not enough plumbers in Texas to get these people whole again. People, forget about restoring power. I mean, there are real problems about how people are going to make it through. Give us the state of play on the ground.
Yeah, and so I think what people maybe around the nation, around the world don't quite get is the magnitude of the disaster for Texans. I think people up north look at our temperatures that we got and say like, what? That's like shorts weather. But for Texas, we're not used to this. We are used to dealing with hot weather and floods. Cold, anything below zero for a prolonged amount of time, we're not prepared for this. We have residents. I have a good percentage of my residents that their warmest piece of clothing is a hoodie, is a sweatshirt hoodie or a windbreaker. That's not going to get you through 17-degree nights through many days. If you look at the news around our state, you see all these apartment fires that are occurring. 4-alarm apartment fires. We've had 2 or 3 in my district in the last few days alone. People are lighting butane stoves. They're lighting charcoal. They're doing anything they can inside of their own homes just to survive. We're going to see stories about people, entire families that are found dead from carbon monoxide poisoning because of their sheer desperation in trying to just survive these temperatures.
We're hearing stories, people literally burning furniture to try and have some heat in the apartment. I understand, Representative, that as we speak, the mayor of Houston still has yet to hear from the governor in terms of the help that's coming from Austin. I've heard Abbott blame solar panels and windmills here as the blame for this. I know ERCOT, he's shifting the accountability. In terms of the state capitol, are they doing everything needed to help out your residents?
It's hard. Look, Houston and Texas, I mean, we're used to disaster. I mean, we've had Hurricane Ike, Hurricane Harvey, we've had floodings, we've had heat waves, we have droughts. And this is just one more to the pile. We're kind of used to disaster, but we seem to be caught off foot every single time. And look, I'm not the governor. I can't judge. But, if I were the governor, I think we would have pushed out the state National Guard. We would have pushed out emergency services, not today, but a week ago. Like when we knew this was coming, we should have had stuff stationed around major cities. We should have water ready. We should have known that water centers, when it freezes, their pumps would explode. We could have prepared for this. We should have prepared for this.
My only point, I know we'll have plenty of time for recriminations, but what is so enraging, even from the outside, is you knew the cold weather was coming. This isn't the first time you guys have dealt with a problem, but in the succeeding years, somehow government's the enemy and you want to deregulate every single person, and then when things go real south, you don't own the problem? Instead, you're blaming literally windmills and solar panels? I mean, what do you think's going to happen when every other windmill across the country didn't freeze because they're regulated that they're not supposed to? And it's not windmills. You know this better than me. Even the nuclear power plants have problems. There's no regulation, and this is what you get when you let private industry do whatever they want. I mean, this was predictable, this problem.
This is the problem. This is the thing that I think it's going to have to be addressed. People ask, what caused this? Well, Mother Nature provided the storm, but our crisis is man-made. We created this crisis because of the last 25, almost 30 decades of absolute Republican domination of the politics of the state has driven our state into this libertarian utopia where everything is deregulated, all government controls are taken away. The state is still controlled by the same people who created the problem, and now we're going to rely on those same people to fix it. I'm hopeful that something is done, but at the same time, I'm pessimistic that people are going to be willing to admit to their own errors, admit that their philosophy and their dogma was wrong, and go back and go back the other direction and put some regulation in, because there's too much money involved. There's too many lobbyists. There's too many big money donors who are invested in this system.
Finally, Representative, before I let you go, and I know you're busy, next segment I'm going to be talking about Ted Cruz. For anybody who argues that, hey, what can you do? You're a senator. I mentioned you were getting hundreds of meals for people trapped yesterday for your constituents, and he's jetting off to Cancun. I can only imagine what you must think of your senator.
Yeah. No. Ted Cruz, his actions time and time again represents everything that people in the entire United States, that people around the world hate about politicians, that they're there just for the privilege, just for the perks, just for the steak dinners. And then when the time comes for them to step up, to sacrifice themselves, to share in the pain of the community, to share in the problems of their people, they're nowhere to be found. A job of a leader is far more than just going out and making policy. You are to be a leader. Go be a leader. And where was he when we needed him to make those calls, to be on TV telling everyone what's going on, to tell everyone what he's investigated and what he's found out, telling us when power will come back on? He's nowhere to be found.
Representative, we're pulling for you guys. Thank you for giving us a few minutes, and stay safe. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Now, we told you how Texas opted to have its own power grid and how that's making things worse right now. I'm going to run through some of the other examples of how the Lone Star State has done its own thing with this idea that they're so libertarian and in the process impacting millions of other Americans. Texas, they sued to end Obamacare. Also tried to uproot the entire immigration system by attempting to get rid of the Dreamer program that protects millions of young people who were brought here not of their own choosing, but by their parents trying to get them deported. Also successfully sued to block Biden's deportation moratorium. Texas also tried to stop tens of millions of votes from being counted, even though it had nothing to do with their own state. When it sued to challenge election results for 4 swing states, that the suit was laughed out of the highest court of the land. By the way, even though Texas has threatened to secede from the union many times over the years, it's pretty happy, as I say, to accept federal help when it needs it, like now. FEMA sending things like fuel, generators, food, water to Texas as we speak. And Andrew, that's what a federal government's supposed to do. That's what governments are supposed to do. They're supposed to be prepared. They're supposed to be there to help. We're going to be talking about Ted Cruz, which is his own special something in the next segment. But to me, the analogy the representative where he was trying to say was the fox guarding the hen house, not the foxes. But my point is, you've covered Texas politics for a while. The idea that deregulation happened and that everything went swimmingly, we see this after every major storm. There's always problems in Texas because if industry is expected to police themselves and add expenses to the bottom line to do things like winterize equipment and the rest, they're not incentivized to do so. This is what happens.
You know, the legislator was talking about Texas's libertarian streak, but that's not really that's an effect, that's not the cause. That's an offshoot from years of rejecting regulation and oversight because it's bad for business. Texas has been very business friendly in the way that they put it. The biggest business in Texas, the biggest industry, 10% of the GDP of the state, is the energy sector. Oil, petrochemicals, refining, that sort of thing, which, as you know, is incredibly damaging to people, the environment, and all sorts of things. So this deregulatory sense is in large fashion done to protect the energy sector in Texas. And they're also vehemently opposed to anything having to do with climate change for obvious reasons that it's bad for that business as well. So things like winterizing their pipes because the climate is changing because of climate change, we're not going to do that. The whole we don't want to be susceptible to federal regulation is because it would be bad for the business's bottom lines. This is about business people in certain industries making buckets of money, and we're seeing the cost of that right now.
There's two things I want to leave you on as it relates to what Texas does, how we got to this mess, and where we go forward. First of all, they're lying to you. This isn't shading it. The Governor Abbott, is lying to Texans about why they're in the problem that they're in. It has nothing to do with the Green New Deal. There is no Green New Deal, okay? And by the way, a Democrat hasn't run the state capitol for a long, long time, okay? So they own this. They're spinning you, and they're lying to you. The second thing is, this happened 11 years ago. This is going to happen again. So what you ought to do if you're in Texas watching us right now, demand, not ask, demand they do a better job for the next time. And they don't leave it up to business to choose to winterize your energy. Okay, when we come back, as promised, more on our friend Ted Cruz. We're going to show you why flying down to Cancun wasn't just hypocritical, but it's also not the first time we've seen this from this clown, and it won't be the last.